Hey, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Dr. Jill Stein. Was the Green Party nominee in 2016 and recently announced she will be running for the nomination again in 2024, which has the cosmopolitan corporate set in the media. Their heads are exploding and the general talking points are out, castigating you as the boogeyman. This time, I think it'll be harder for them to blame you if Democrats lose, because obviously there's other, independent candidates and third-party candidates. But before we get to all of that, I just want to start with obviously the biggest story in the world right now. The recent numbers, which could be more, are over 13,000 have died in Gaza. You've been outspoken about Israel and Palestine for a long time. You're Jewish. So I want to ask you, obviously, it's horrific what's going on. The U.S. more or less is right on the bandwagon with what Israel is doing. But you have warned about, the threat of nuclear war for a long time as well. And it seems that the U.S. is sending, submarines and all sorts of manpower. And you also have Netanyahu and, a lot of the extremists in Israel who have been really beating their chests for war with Iran for a long time. So it seems like this is headed potentially for catastrophe.
Exactly. There are so many reasons to just call a halt to the whole thing immediately for all sorts of reasons, that this is a genocide, this is ethnic cleansing, this is horrific on a human and moral level. It's also unbelievably dangerous in an unprecedented way. We have a nuclear submarine there on site off the coast of Gaza. Nuclear submarines carry the equivalent of 4,000 Hiroshima bombs, which is enough to create nuclear winter that will starve 1 out of every 3 human beings on the planet. Those weapons shouldn't exist at all, and they should not be brought into this explosive tinderbox, not to mention that Israel itself has nuclear weapons, many of them illegal, and the U.S. has been greenlighting this whole enterprise. And, back since the days of Reagan, Israel was considered the unsinkable battleship for the U.S., the unsinkable battleship in the Middle East, to basically ensure that our hegemony would prevail. And we no longer live in that unipolar world. We're now in a multipolar world. And to be duking this out in a military way, which will not solve the horrific problems, will not solve the genocide, will not solve the conflict of Israel with its neighbors. Israel had been making some progress and, had formal relations with many of its neighbors who have now broken off those relations. We have an accelerating war, border skirmishes, but could easily become a war. These are the worst border skirmishes since the actual war between Israel and Hezbollah back in 2006. We're kind of approaching that again. You have the Houthi rebels from Yemen who've now hijacked an Israeli-tied cargo ship, and said that they will continue to do that. So, we're kind of seeing the worst case scenario continue to evolve before our very eyes. And this is, to my mind, this is another reason why it's so important, not just to challenge, but to completely reject the prevailing notion of militarism as foreign policy. And this is like the major point of agreement between Democrats and Republicans. This is how they conduct foreign policy. This is where they spend, over half of our discretionary budget. We are, as Martin Luther King said, we are, my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. And that was, a generation or two ago. And it's even more true today. And the consequences of that become more and more, just absolutely dangerous and we're all in the target hairs in this era of nuclear weapons. Wars don't stay over there. And if nuclear weapons are fired in the Middle East, everyone needs to know that nuclear winter doesn't stay over there, that if a lot of dust and debris is kicked up into the atmosphere, and that's what happens when you set off nuclear weapons, that becomes global very quickly, and food production is diminished. And we have enough threats to food production right now from the climate crisis that, again, our fearless leaders have inflicted upon us, to the benefit of their big donors. And, so food production is kind of a great leveler here, along with nuclear weapons. And we can't think of the war as over there. We really need to abide by international law. We need to insist that it be complied with immediately. And that includes not only that Israel shouldn't have nuclear weapons, that includes that there should be no assault taking place on Gaza. Yes, the attack of Hamas was brutal and horrific, but on the other hand, that's what happens when you occupy a nation and you basically create an open air prison and you have your boot on the neck. The boot is on the neck now in just an unbelievable way. It's as if we are witnessing George Floyd, being murdered here, multiplied millions of times over. And the world is crying out in horror at this. So this is as dangerous for Israel as it is for everyone else, because, and for Gaza in particular. Ultimately, this is as dangerous for Israel because there will be no Israel if this is how Israel behaves, and it is becoming the global pariah state, and just increasing its conflict, an unmanageable conflict, which is being set up right now with its neighbors. So this is a disaster. It has to be stopped. And we need to be the adults in the room, because the Democrats and the Republicans have demonstrated over and over. They're taking marching orders here from AIPAC. They are not the adults in the room, and they need to be thrown out, in so many words.
Let's say, for argument's sake, in a dream scenario, you become president. There's the military-industrial complex, and then there's the sacred cow of Israel and the Israel lobby. They're both very powerful. What would be the answer? Because I don't think the people out there calling for a ceasefire are really only calling for a ceasefire. I think after that, they want actual restitution and a remedy for, however you want to define it. Since 1948, since 1967, Palestinians to get their own country. But what do you do? Because, for example, we wouldn't say, hey, you, Jill Stein in Massachusetts, or me, Jordan in New York, or any American, leave. We're occupiers too. I mean, that's the truth. We're all occupying somebody's land. So we can't really expect all of the Israelis to leave. But then again, obviously the world, and particularly young people, I think, which is a good thing, is starting to, not turn the other way and say, no, we need whatever people think, whether it's a one-state solution, a two-state solution. How do you even begin to break through if you were president? The Israel lobby, the military-industrial complex, I think, gaslighting that it's anti-Semitism to call for such things. How do we give Palestinians their own country?
Yeah, I mean, essentially we have to negotiate. And it's not all that far in the distant past that even Hamas signed on to a two-state solution, not all that long ago. So, there is the means of negotiating here. And, there are imprisoned leaders right now from the PLO who had a very conciliatory approach, who wanted to use diplomacy. And over and over again, Israel and the U.S. have made that absolutely impossible, and have essentially been torturing, if I can use that word, torturing 2.25 million people in this, this besieged Gaza enclave since, for the last 17 years, where every drop of water, every morsel of food is essentially controlled, where, people have to travel. If they want to go to school, they would have to travel 3 to 4 hours because of the checkpoints and the wall and the walls. It's been an absolutely horrific, tortured existence for a long time. So, the violence that has, it has been violence, and if you tally the numbers of Palestinians who've been killed and abused since the founding of Israel is enormous, and it makes ridiculous the notion that only the assault of Hamas is the focus here. Hamas itself was responding to horrific violence. There's been a whole cycle of violence, which began with the displacement of 750,000 people with the so-called Nakba at the time of the founding of the State of Israel. And yes, there was urgent need, but that doesn't justify displacing and slaughtering a lot of people. I think it was somewhere around 13,000 who died at the time of the first Nakba. So, the numbers have been absolutely off the charts, and it's mostly been the Palestinians who've been on the receiving end. So there is no peace and security here without addressing kind of the fundamental violence of an apartheid state. And Israel has been conceived as an apartheid state. Miko Peled, who's one of a noted author and an Israeli advocate for Palestinian human rights. His father was he comes from the military aristocracy of Israel, and his father was in on all the meetings. And after this 67 war, where they were victorious, his father wanted to know, so, okay, now can we begin to develop an equitable society? And he was basically told in so many words, no, that's not the game plan. It's really been about ethnic cleansing and hijacking the land of the Palestinians from the get-go. So, as a person of Jewish background who grew up after the Holocaust, this is not okay, especially in a state that was founded in order to safeguard against us from holocausts, to be committing genocide, what is considered by most experts that I've seen a textbook case of genocide now. This is just unbearable. This is not okay. This is unthinkable. And, I think it's really restoring a lot of faith in humanity to see that people are not going to let this happen. The two blockades that basically took place over the weekend of the DNC, both in DC and then in California, it's really great to see people of Jewish faith, and then lots of other people of faith and people of no faith, who are saying this is not what humanity does, and this has to stop. And I'll say, as a healthcare provider, as a doctor, it completely freaks me out to know that we're on a death watch right now. We are on a death watch of 2 million people. You cannot deprive 2 million people of food and water, except for a crumb here and there. And then, there's no hygiene, there's no sewage. People are being subjected right now to nothing short of torture, and and have lost their homes, and then they have to flee, and then they're bombed while they flee, and then they're bombed when they get to southern Gaza, where they were told to flee. This, by no stretch of the imagination, is this anything but calculated ethnic cleansing and genocide. And it's got to be stopped. It's got to be stopped if there's any hope for humanity, if there's any hope for Israel, as well as any hope for Gaza. This is not okay. It's got to be stopped. And I think the determination of people to make it stop grows. And your question about, so how do we enforce this? Fortunately, we have a body of international law. So we don't have to invent the solutions here. What we have to do is stop the hands of the war profiteers, especially in this country, who are benefiting. I mean, their profits have gone through the roof in the last 2 years, approximately doubling with the war in Ukraine. And now forget the war in Ukraine, because we have a shiny new war here in Israel. And for us to be basically governed by war profiteers is horrific. It speaks volumes about what's wrong with our system, the so-called best democracy that money can buy, and AIPAC and the weapons industry, as well as the fossil fuel industry and Wall Street. Those are kind of the usual suspects who are drivers here. And the good thing is that this is not news to the American people. The American people are horrified by the basically the hijack of our election system. Our election system is basically a corporate front. It's astroturf for corporations, and the American people are horrified about this. But of course, it never gets discussed because it's not permitted. This is taboo. But this is part of our agenda. This is part of how we fix the problem. We need a solution that provides security and justice to all parties. We can only get to that through a ceasefire and negotiations. And we need a change of our political landscape, which the American people, fortunately, are demanding.
And real quick, before we move on, I mean, let's say, for argument's sake, for my Zionist father, God bless him, I love him, but we don't agree on this. If he's watching, it would say, this Jill Stein, this is all anti-Semitism. She's, anti-Israel. To me, isn't what Israel's doing, even if you want to say, on October 7th, certainly, I think most of the world's sympathy was with Israel. They squandered that very quickly. Isn't this just going to create a much, much, much worse Hamas, which is basically what happened? That's how ISIS was created, by, ridiculously and horrifically invading Iraq, maiming and killing 500,000 Iraqis. That's what recruited and created ISIS. Aren't you just giving now, at this point, thousands and thousands and thousands of mourners and widows and people who have lost loved ones? Aren't you kind of giving them reason to want to hate and attack Israel in the future?
Exactly. Absolutely. And the orphans that are being generated as well. There's just so much misery being created right now. And that only goes one place. It just creates more violence. And we see this over and over and over again. This is also how Hamas got created, if I understand correctly, in Lebanon, where, we had a war in Lebanon to eliminate the PLO, and they were basically then replaced by Hamas. And you just create an escalating series of violence and crisis, and one generation after another. It's just like, it's common sense. I understand the trauma that many Zionists come to this with. They're coming to this with their own sense of trauma that makes them feel like they have no choice but to resort to violence and fascism, essentially. But I think that's not their higher selves. And it's like, Jews don't let Jews go fascist. We can't do that. There's nothing that, that endangers Jews themselves or any group by basically embracing this endless hostile militarism. There is no end to it. And in the age of nuclear weapons, this very quickly boils down to mutual annihilation. And that doesn't work. And because we're all in the target hairs now, we have a lot of people who can problem solve here, and a lot of people who can insist that we lift up our higher humanity. And that's what we're seeing people do by the millions out in the street right now. And it is really, to my mind, it's incredibly heartwarming to see the numbers of people who are saying, I can't rest. This is not okay. I'm not just going to go look the other way. This is horrific. This is incompatible with humanity on one small planet.
Right. And moving on to the elections right now. Listen, new Gallup poll out last month, support for third parties up to 63%. Even among the Democratic Party, over half of the Democratic Party members are open to a third party. Yeah, the corporate media stooges say, well, when you actually look inside the numbers, you name a third party candidate, it's less support. But overall, I'd say it's widespread that Democrats and Republicans are kind of sick of the two parties. To me, you look at Biden's poll numbers right now. I mean, a new NBC News poll, he's losing to Trump among young voters. which is pretty terrifying, even if you don't like Biden. The fact that Donald Trump would have more support, I think it's 46 to 42 among age 18 to 34. I mean, young people held their nose for Biden in 2020, and clearly they're not willing to do it again. And I don't think it's only based on the horrors in the Middle East. I think it's based on a lot of other failed promises. You look at the New York Times poll where Biden's losing out of 5 out of the 6 states, the swing states. I would ask you, you've been attacked, Cornel West, Ralph Nader, we could go down the list as spoilers. If the Democratic Party is so worried about losing to Donald Trump, who I think we would both agree definitely has some fascist tendencies, if not worse, aren't they kind of now looking at the numbers saying, you know, we're not actually concerned about that if we're willing to roll with a sinking Titanic?
Yeah. It's outrageous that the Democrats are in total denial and they want to blame their loss on a third party. So they're crying spoiler, but they really have no one to blame for themselves. And I think the most clear evidence of that is to look at the biggest spoiled election that they ever had, spoiled in terms of spoiling their monopoly, their political stranglehold. And that's the election of 2010, following the Wall Street bailouts, where Wall Street got bailed out and homeowners got thrown out to the tune of millions of people who lost their homes while Wall Street got trillions of dollars. And, what happened there? Well, you lost 1,000 Democratic state rep seats. You lost 64 congressional seats, and the Democrats lost 12 Senate seats and 13 governorships. So this was the biggest, most massive loss of all. And there were no third party candidates to blame that on. That was just the Democrats getting whacked for having abandoned their base, for having abandoned working people. And it's continued to be that way ever since. They continue to serve Wall Street, who's, making out like bandits, while working people are struggling, over 60% paycheck to paycheck, 40% of renters struggling to keep a roof over their heads, who are all paying more than 30% of their income just to stay where they are, with close to 3 million evictions a year, 500,000 people every night on the streets without housing, 1/4 of Americans who do not have adequate food, half of young people who describe themselves as hopeless for the future, in part because of the climate, because of the betrayal of who? The Republicans never pretended they were on their side, but the Democrats did. Joe Biden's promises that he wouldn't, he would not be drilling on public land, would not be auctioning off public land. That's baloney. The whole Inflation Reduction Act is all about auctioning off. In fact, it is a fossil fuels first bill. It is not a climate bill. It is in some ways, but overwhelmingly its impact is to really mandate the development of fossil fuels and to make renewable energy a second-class citizen that can only be done in any significant way after you have already auctioned off 60 million acres a year of offshore waters for exploitation and 2 million acres per year of onshore land. So people are really furious and for good reason. So, the Democrats have no one to blame but themselves, and their effort to use the spoiler thing is just ludicrous. And I think people are kind of sick of it, and they're feeling like it's their lives that are spoiled. It's our political system that's spoiled. It's not the candidates who actually offer solutions. And the very notion of spoiling is essentially anti-democratic. It says that you don't have a right as a voter to choose what candidate you vote for. That is preposterous. And I might add, there is a solution called ranked choice voting, which eliminates any possibility of a split election or a split vote. And the Democrats actually fight this. They fight to prevent it. They fight to keep it off the ballot, or they use it just in their own primaries because it's a very good system, and they refuse to use it in the general. Why is that? It's because they really rely on this concept of fear campaigning and smearing third party and independent candidates in order to try to discredit us. Because if word gets out, that we are here with the real solutions that people are clamoring for healthcare as a human right, for ending student debt, for free public higher education, for the right to a good wage job, another abandoned promise of Joe Biden, which was, the right to a $15 minimum wage. And they just dropped that like they dropped everything else. So people are really angry. The concept of spoiler, I think it doesn't hold much water, especially now that there's this incredible rise of independent candidates. So I'd say hold on to your hats. And, this is the time to fight for our democratic rights and our right to vote. Not only our right to vote, but our right to vote for a candidate of our choosing, because without that, the right to vote doesn't mean anything.
And let me ask you, obviously it's kind of a brick wall, which is the corporate media, and then blacking out candidates like you. In fairness, they've pretended Marianne Williamson has not been running for a year. She's been in the Democratic primary. They're now making it seem like this, Dean Phillips, a Minnesota congressman, is the one challenger to Biden, when obviously Williamson has been in there for over a year. Whether you support her or not, I mean, this is anti-democratic, what the media does, what the party does, to kind of pretend that this is just, a smooth cruise line. Biden, no challengers, no other choices. How do you kind of break through as compared to 2016, when they either blacked you out or when they covered you, it was all, you're a Russian stooge, a lot of propaganda? Because unlike then, I think, as we discussed, people are more open now. If they knew about your candidacy, other independent candidates or third party candidates, they're more open to considering it in the face of two really historically unpopular candidates in Trump and Biden. What's your plans to kind of break through and, make sure that young people in particular, but disenchanted older voters done with this two-party duopoly, can consider you?
Yeah. So I don't want to jinx this because it's only just begun, but we've had really incredible coverage by mainstream media at this point. And it's been incredibly fair too. I mean, it's been like, pinch me, am I dreaming? At least so far, it's going well. And we're being bombarded with offers for interviews, everything from Good Morning America to Tucker Carlson and CNN, BBC, and so far the coverage has been really thoughtful. And it's made me wonder, wow, is there like a new generation of reporters who are on the receiving end right now who have also had it up to here, with this rigged system? I don't know.
It sounds too good to be true.
It does sound too good to be true. And I would not hold my breath, and I go into every interview ready to be assaulted. But so far, so good. I mean, maybe it's because I'm better prepared or something. and after two other runs, you kind of know how they're coming at you. And the answers are really pretty slam dunk. So it may be that I'm just less of a vulnerable target, but they are allowing me to be interviewed. And, so I'd say we're going to see how it goes. But RFK, I think, set a really interesting example by just doing lots of independent media. He got out there. And I think, that's really important to do as well. And, to be talking to real journalists like yourself, this is the name of the game. And, I hope people will support real journalists like this program and, help real journalism educate the American public, because people really want to know. And that's a big difference, that people are really hungry for other choices right now. So we've only just begun. We have a much more experienced staff this time around as well, and we'll have much more of a developed ground game, and we'll be doing more on the ground outreach, which I hope will start soon, and tour of colleges. And people are screaming, and the war on Gaza is a really powerful jumping off point right now. And people are splitting, from the Democratic Party in a way that they never have before. So there's potentially a kind of perfect storm here for, an unexpected development.
And let me ask you two more things real quick. I think, I've been on the road for 8 years. One of the honestly most optimistic developments and positive developments has been this strike wave. United Auto Workers recently, they just passed a new contract between the big three companies. I think UAW's that strike was not just about auto workers. I think there was a lot of populist themes about, the 1%, 99%, corruption, and they won. And the public was significantly on their side. And you're a student of history, that, as that red line has gone up with all the money being hoarded by the top, that line of unionization has gone way down. What do you think in terms of, I don't want to say you piggybacking off of that, but between the UAW workers, healthcare workers that have been on strike getting new contracts, teachers, it seems that a lot of folks have said, fuck it, we're not waiting for DC.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'd add the railroad workers to that too, who were just brutally suppressed and whose right to strike, was denied them, which is really it's a red flag to all working people, that the right to strike is being denied working people. And they, shortly afterwards, at least part of their union came out and said, it's time to break with the Democratic Party. They don't work for us. And one of the really exciting things in our campaign so far is that we are working with the Amazon labor union. And in fact, we're having a launch tomorrow night, which is Tuesday night at 8 p.m. You can find out about it at my Twitter at Dr. Jill Stein, Dr. No period, Jill Stein, or at our website, Jill Stein 2024. And you can sign up to be a part of this launch. And one of the people on the launch is Christopher Smalls, who is hurting like a lot of American workers are hurting, and they've had enough. And they're not going to continue to just sit back and be thrown under the bus. So it's really exciting. I think to me, it's just, it speaks of this unprecedented rebellion that we're in right now. We're really in a moment of rebellion, especially for working people. And to have, this collaboration from the get-go with this really powerful insurgent union, is incredibly exciting. And this is sort of the first of what we hope will be a growing movement to align with working people. And we focus really on three crises right now: crushing inequality, endless war, and climate collapse. And they all intensify each other. And one of them cannot be solved without also solving the other. And this is where our agenda, for a Green New Deal and an economic Bill of Rights and reparations and healthcare as a human right and all of that, and, ending student debt and medical debt, all those things really converge. And this is what people are demanding. And the reason, I threw my hat into the ring was after having supported Dr. West's race, which is powerful, really important, and I'm grateful that he continues to have a voice in the race. But when he gave up $4 million worth of ballot lines, it made me really worry, will there be a pro-worker, anti-war climate emergency agenda front and center in this election and on the ballot across the nation? Because if you're not on the ballot across the nation, you're a footnote in this election. You maybe have a very powerful moral authority, but you're not going to hold power to account. And, parties are a mixed bag. They're not easy. They're not fun. And it's really hard to get together with a party for the first time in a presidential race. So I totally understand why this wasn't right for Dr. West and his family. Wasn't the right thing for him at this point, and that's okay. But for me, I've kind of been working on this for about 20 years to build our power to fight back. And, political parties are very flawed institutions, like human beings are flawed, entities as well. And we need them, unfortunately, our human brothers and sisters, and we need political coalitions right now, enduring political coalitions, which is what political parties are. So, I didn't want to see that go to waste. I want to see us fight. I want to see us on the ballot, and I want to see us preserve what we've built and build from there.
That's my last question. It was a good segue. I interviewed Dr. West recently. He was complimentary of you, but he was honest. To him, he didn't feel kind of the Green Party was the mechanism for, I guess, mass movement politics. Let me just play you part of that.
You see, I'm not convinced that the Green Party is the primary institutional vehicle for a mass-based campaign. I think it's proven over time it's just not a mass-based party. And over again, it's been unable to convince the masses of folk that people ought to go their way. And so I'm still fundamentally committed to a mass-based campaign, but the party, for me, in many ways, is much more of an obstacle. I discovered.
I didn't play that as a got you, but I'm curious because I think a lot of people who really are focused on a party, a third party, were disappointed that he went independent. I mean, they like Cornel West and believe in what he's proposing, but they believe in building a third party. What do you say to his, I guess, criticism that in his preliminary exposure, the Green Party wasn't a movement or a mass-based vehicle?
So to that, I would just say, look at the history here. Independent parties that are not captured by corporations, they usually have a lifespan of about 10 years and then they're gone. Look at the Citizens Party, which was like the first environmental party back in the 80s. They had a famous, environmental professor, who they ran, and he made a little bit of a splash. But they were gone within 10 years. Look at the Labor Party, which started around the same time as the Greens, but with way more institutional support and money, and were networked with the unions. They were gone within 10 years. I don't think they ever ran candidates even. One after the other, the Peace and Freedom Party, which had ballot status in maybe 15 states at one point. Now they're beaten back to one state. We have a system which systematically destroys its competitors, and corporate money and resources are out to get you from day one in all sorts of ways, including by keeping you off the ballot, by ensuring that the press doesn't cover you, by making it impossible to fundraise and financially support yourself, and through lots of dirty tricks. And you can look at what the Democratic Party routinely does, how they called people who signed Matt Ho's ballot petitions in North Carolina when he was running for Senate in 2020. They pretended to be the Green Party and they talked people into unsigning. This is what the Democrats do. They did dirty tricks like that too.
That was actually electoral fraud. That was electoral fraud.
Absolutely. It totally was. And they also colluded to create something like 23 different lawsuits against Ralph Nader in, I think it was like his 2004 election, so there's a lot of stuff coming at you. And for the most part, independent parties, and that is non-corporate parties that don't have billionaires and bankers and corporate money behind them, they're usually gone within 10 years. And the Green Party, from that perspective, is a great beginning. Now, it's not where it needs to be. It needs a lot of work. It's not easy to have a party, especially a party that doesn't have corporate money to sort of keep it going. But there's a lot of support and there's a lot of volunteer work, and Greens are activists. We are grassroots activists. And it's a mix of people. It may not be exactly the mix that we're going for. And, there are games going on all the time by way of COINTELPRO that I'm sure are working their way inside of our political organizations, just like they do to our nonprofits and so on. So there's a lot that we have to contend with. But, you could say the Green Party is the weakest third party there ever was, except for all the others that have ever existed. It's like democracy, worst form of government, except for anything else that's ever been tried. So, once you do this business for a while, you see that you really need, the first couple of races I ran in, I completely ignored the party. I didn't find the party helpful at all. And it was mostly problems. And I completely understand the perspective of a newcomer. And it's not until you know how the system works. And also that's just going to be the chatter that goes on in any organization. People are going to make a lot of demands of you when they are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this organization. They're going to ask stuff of you. And sometimes you can provide it and sometimes you can't. And they're going to tell you how they want your policies to be structured and what they want you to say. And you're going to get a lot of that. It's like being involved in any kind of an organization. It has its, pain in the butt kind of administrative side. And then it has its incredibly helpful, resourceful, aspects too. And to my mind, you get used to the downside and the upside becomes incredibly important and indispensable. And I'd say find that party that we can build from. I think we have a very solid foundation here. And yeah, it's got a lot of work to do. And I'd encourage people to become part of it and make it better. It's a very decentralized party, for better and for worse. It's extremely decentralized. And so you can have a big impact, in your local or your state organization.
And I know, I know this was an impromptu run. You weren't expecting to run, but as you're laying the brick of your campaign, obviously you got to formally win the nomination, but do you expect to match? Yeah, I think you were on 46 ballots in 2016. Do you expect to be on, nearly 50 ballots? What could people expect?
So we were on 47 all together, and that included DC. You could say the 51st state. It should be the 51st state. So we were on 47, and we expect to do at least that well this time. And we're hoping to be on all of the ballots. We have actually about 80% of the work done. We're not on 80% of the lines, but if you consider how hard it is and what the requirements are in certain states, they're just totally off the charts. We have most of those hard states already done. So we have to raise $1 million for ballot access, and organize our volunteers and use the state parties who know how to watchdog this stuff, and they're incredibly helpful. So we have a lot of work to do, but it's not a lot considering what's already behind us. So we're very excited and really hopeful. And I should mention that tomorrow night we're doing our formal Zoom launch, and really encourage people to join us on Zoom, for volunteers, for supporters. And our two speakers are going to be Chris Smalls from the Amazon Labor Union and Miko Peled, a really powerful Palestinian rights advocate who's lived the movement for his whole life, essentially, and is really, what can I say, very inspired and empowering to hear from. And, that's kind of like the spectrum of where we are right now in our crisis. It's the crisis of working people, and it's a crisis of empire. And the two go hand in hand, because empire endangers us and squanders our resources and leaves us impoverished at home. And, it really calls for a reboot of our political and economic system. And we're calling for nothing less, but in a very kitchen table kind of way that everyday people understand. So we're really excited and invite people to join us tomorrow night if you're able.
And they could find out more your website.
Yes, JillStein2024.com.
And I would also argue, I would love to have every car be electric, but you could make that happen tomorrow. If you don't cut this empire, particularly the military, by 75%, that would be the biggest part and culprit of the climate inferno, the Pentagon. So electric vehicles are only going to get you so far if you don't dramatically take a battering ram to the carbon and pollution being emitted by our military industrial complex.
Well said. I couldn't agree more.
Thanks so much for taking the time, Dr. Stein. Good luck.
Thank you so much. Great talking with you, as always, Jordan.
Absolutely. So that was Dr. Jill Stein. She is running for the Green Party nomination. And I think, honestly, it's very, very different than it was in 2016. I really think this neoliberal bubble that we've been living in for the last 40 years is really popping. I think 2020 might have been the last stand because I think a lot of particularly younger voters, even black voters, a lot more black people came out for Biden and your Atlanta, for example. That's why he won Georgia. More black voters came out in Milwaukee for Biden than did Hillary Clinton 4 years earlier. Detroit, same thing. More black voters came out, young voters, not because they were so enamored by Biden, but because they truly believe Trump was a fascist threat, having lived through Trump for 4 years. But the thing is, if you're going to sell them on vote fascism out and build back better with me, but the build back better is moving backwards, you fool me once, you're not going to fool me again. That doesn't mean there aren't grave threats associated with Trump, who at this point I'm not even convinced will be the nominee. I would, as I've said for a long time, do not dismiss the chance that Donald Trump drops out if he's facing potential conviction. If you know Donald Trump, I grew up in New York. There's one thing he's not going to do, and that's he ain't going to go to prison. He'd rather take himself out than go behind bars. And if these trials start before the election, which 2 of them at the moment are on track to start, sure, you could say, well, even if he loses, he could appeal and he could run from prison. Donald Trump's not going to allow himself to go to prison. He will drop. I believe he would make a deal, drop out, and, frame it as the deep state took down our movement. If he gets, instead, a slap on the wrist, maybe house arrest. But putting all that aside, I think as compared to 2016 and now, the social media makes a big difference. This new information age, which has a lot of negatives, too much information, a lot of it is bullshit, if you ask me, between the gazillion YouTube channels all bloviating about the same bullshit and saying the same thing. Very few actual independent journalists out there on the ground talking to the people. But I think social media has really, really informed a whole new generation of people, not just young people who aren't really even politically active or astute in the first place, but particularly young people. And they are starting to kind of reject and almost revolt against this lesser of 2 evils, because the lesser evil is still making their life pretty miserable. I mean, Biden didn't do the bare minimum. He ran on a $15 minimum wage. He moonwalked away from that on day one, claiming he was a parliamentarian. He could have easily put the $15 minimum wage in the original COVID relief bill and, use the bully pulpit of the presidency to shame Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. At least he'd get points for fighting. I mean, imagine he did one good thing. The Democrats did one good thing, the child tax credit, which did cut poverty significantly. You're going to use as a bumper sticker? Hey, we made things better for a year and then allowed it to go back to shit. Vote for us. That's not a political slogan. That's not a campaign. That's actually kind of justification for why people shouldn't vote for you, because you're giving them temporary crumbs. Of course, this is not a praising of the Republicans, and I'm not telling you who to vote for, but if you ran on a $15 minimum wage, you ran away from that. You ran on a public option, which is not enough, but it's better. I don't think he's mentioned that since the campaign. You ran on $2,000 checks. You gave people $1,400. You ran on stopping public drilling on public lands. You've doubled it. He's continued Trump's policies, which is a backdoor privatization of Medicare. He's continued a lot of Trump's policies on the border. Okay, but he sounds nicer doing it. He sounds more folksy doing it. He's less hateful towards the Muslims and the gay people. Thanks for that. But That doesn't change the fact that millions of people are working 2 to 3 jobs. Doesn't change the fact that millions of people are rationing insulin. Doesn't change the fact that millions of people are choosing between necessities like food or the electric bill, groceries or medicine. Doesn't change the fact that 64% in new surveys are living paycheck to paycheck. And you want to spin this as a strong economy? That's what I mean by the neoliberal bubble. There's only so long you could get by with this fairy dust of, low unemployment and great, strong GDP and the stock market's doing well. Well, eventually the starving masses either will not vote. That is the largest voting group right now, the non-voters, or they're going to come out and not vote for you, or they are going to vote for the people like Jill Stein or Cornel West or whoever you choose that's actually proposing tangible, bold, structural, keyword, structural change. So I think Biden's in a world of trouble. Like I said with Trump, I would not put it out of the realm of possibility that Biden pulls an LBJ and come January or February, he steps aside. And if these polls continue, do not think for a second that Obama world and the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party will not run a full throttle, probably private campaign to get him to step aside. I think if it's up to them, they would rather lose and remain in first class going down at the Titanic. I stole that from Bernie Sanders. That was his line, that they'd rather lose as long as they keep their first class tickets on the Titanic than win and actually, change their ways and give up the corporate money. However, I do think that they are kind of naive enough to think, well, if Biden is still losing in all these swing states, we'll just throw in Gavin Newsom or, come up with a way to get around Kamala Harris and we'll be fine. Well, according to the recent New York Times polls, Gavin Newsom is losing to Trump. Kamala Harris is losing to Trump. Gretchen Whitmer is losing to Trump. So even the younger, supposedly, progressive politicians are losing to Trump. That should tell you it's not just an age problem. It's a party problem. It's a policy problem. So yeah, definitely check out Jill Stein's campaign. Is she perfect? No politician is perfect. But I will say, if you actually look at her policies and you look at her consistency, if she were elected, she would certainly put up a fight against the corrupt two-party duopoly rather than Biden just saying, this is the best we could do. She would have probably used the executive pen far more than Biden has. And most importantly, whether or not she wins or not, you're not going to break the two-party duopoly if you keep holding your nose and saying, well, this time, it's too important. We got to just vote Biden in or vote or whoever the Democrat or Republican is to avoid the other. How many times can we go through this horrible car wash? Rinse and repeat. The lesser of two evils, it's still pretty bad. Thank you for watching. Tomorrow, definitely tune in at 5 o'clock Eastern. We're going to have part 2 of Tina Desiree Berg's special report. She did a report a week or so ago on a really corrupt, or biased district attorney in San Diego that has alarming ties to fascists. So definitely check out that. It might sound like a local story, but it actually has broad national implications, because these kinds of district attorneys or corrupt state attorney generals are palling around with a lot of white supremacist groups. So Tina will have that at 5 o'clock Eastern tomorrow on Tuesday. Then Ron Placone on Wednesday will have the 2023 top turkeys of the year. That would be the top political turkeys of the year. We do it every year. I think he's doing a top 5 list. So that'll be great. Thank you for watching. We will see you back here tomorrow.